in a little over a week, my family and I are going to pack up our car and ride down to Mountain City, Tennessee to visit my mother, as we do just about every year. It's a 10-hour ride. I think for some of you that's not a big deal. For us, it's excruciating. And I really love my mother when we pull out of the driveway, and I love her for the first 4 or 5 hours, and then, because she retired there, I'm not from there. And then by about hour 6, I start thinking about all the things that I have difficulty with my mother. And by the time we're pulling up the driveway, I'm like in a murderous rage usually, and I have to go take a nap. However, there are signs of we're almost there. And this is another thing I have trouble with. The signs that we're almost there are signs that say you're really not in Kansas anymore. Such as the big sign on the highway. I know that this says all kinds of things about me that are not nice things. The sign on the highway that says Chilhowie Primitive Baptist Church. I don't know why I see that sign and I want to make a U-turn. There's something about the idea of primitive and Baptist put together that freaks me out. I don't know what's going on at that church, but it doesn't sound good. So there's that sign. And then the other signs are you start regularly, like every 7 to 10 miles, you see a billboard with a message from a Christian church. And they are messages like Jesus saves and seek the truth. And there's a phone number, 1-800-THE-TRUTH. And I asked at the 9 o'clock service if anyone's ever seen a sign like that, and if they called, and actually Smita made the call. And it's exactly what I thought. If you dial 1-800-THE-TRUTH, you hear a lot about hell, which is a real way to sell Christianity to people, right? And then besides those signs, there's lots of signs that have passages from the Gospel of John in particular. Most popular for billboards is the Gospel of John. Like, I am the way and the truth and the life. Whoever, comes to me will never die, and all that sort of thing. And you must be born again. And then also, I am the bread of life, right out of our gospel lesson for today. And while I drive, I guess there's always part of me that has, even if I'm on vacation, my professional mind is still turning, and I'm looking at these billboards, and the whole culture about, Christianity, definitely largely different flavor than the brand that I'm used to. But I'm even thinking in the car, I'm like, who are these billboards for? Because if you're trying to introduce Jesus to people, I really don't think a sign that says you must be born again is going to suck people in. It's just going to, what does that even mean? Ask Nicodemus. Like when Nicodemus is confused, it doesn't make any damn sense. What do you mean be born again? And and it's like, is this supposed to make people feel like, oh yeah, I'll come to church? Or I am the way and the truth and the life? What does that mean? It's so confusing. And this thing about, too, I am the bread of life, all these things that John's Gospels has Jesus saying are weird. And you don't think they're weird, maybe, because you're so used to them, because you've been brought up Christian. But I guarantee you, I was not brought up Christian. They're freaky. And not only are they freaky, it's about to get a lot freakier, because Jesus is going to talk about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. I think that's coming up next week. It just gets weirder and weirder. And in the gospel lesson, there's a bunch of people today in this story who are there because they got bread and fish at the big picnic that Jesus threw in the wilderness, and they followed him because they want more than that. And then he's talking about how he's the bread of life. And they're clearly confused. And once they get to the part where Jesus starts talking about eating him, everybody says, okay, thank you very much, and kind of walks away. That's coming up. He loses people. He does not know how to sell his product. And this whole message in John's Gospel very much parallels, on purpose, by the way, the story in Exodus, where, guess what? People are in the wilderness again. just like they were during the feeding of the 5,000. And these people are in the wilderness, in the Exodus story, because they've trusted Moses. And Moses has said, your God wants your freedom, and your God is going to give you a life of freedom, which is much better than being enslaved and stuck in Egypt. And so the people trust Moses, and they go out into the desert, and guess what happens? Their supplies start to run low after a few days. The water and the food that they brought is running out, and they're starting to freak out. And they turn to Moses, and they say, hey, if you had told me before I packed that the choice was living in Egypt as a slave and having dinner tonight, or going out into the wilderness and being free but dead, I think I would have stayed home. Wish he had shared that information with me. And Moses takes their complaint. This happens maybe 52 times in Exodus. Moses listens to the people's complaint and basically says, why are you yelling at me? I'm just telling you what God said. And Moses goes to God, and Moses complains to God. And then God tells Moses, tell him to go to bed. I'll take care of it. And you have this bizarre story where all of a sudden quail fall out of the sky. It's a little strange. I don't know whether I want to get my dinner that way, but if I was really hungry, I guess I'd take it. But weirder than that is they wake up in the morning, and there is this, first they think it's dew on the ground, but then it hardens up. And they pick it up, and what they say is, what is this? The Hebrew for what is this is manna. So it literally means basically, what the hell is this? And Moses says, you wanted bread? This is the bread from heaven. And I just can't really imagine anyone jumping down, up and down for joy. If you were looking forward to getting a nice ciabatta roll, and you get this stuff on the ground that, by the way, you can't even keep. It turns all wormy and it falls apart later on in the day. You can't even keep any of it. But the manna is the thing that sustains them all through the wilderness wandering. It's the thing that they didn't want that sustains them. And it's the bread of heaven. Going back to the John lesson, what Jesus is telling the people about the bread that they fed them, again, it's kind of complicated, but it's pretty much this. The people have followed Jesus. He fed them at the feeding of the 5,000. They like that. They follow him. He turns around to them, and he says, listen, I know that the reason that you're still walking around with me is because you really like getting that bread. But bread, if you didn't know, is an empty carb. And I could give you more of it. You're going to wind up more hungry. Do you find that? I eat like a whole bowl of pasta, and all I want after that is another whole bowl of pasta. It's true. And here's this bread. And Jesus is saying, you're going to be hungry again, and you're going to be hungry again. And you're going to be hungry again. And you can live your whole life like that. You can live your whole life taking things that you think are going to fill you, and you're going to wind up empty at the end. You can desperately want that early retirement package, but I guarantee you there's only so much golf you can play. You are not going to feel fed. That's not going to do it. Neither is the perfect lawn. You can spend hours a day pulling out dandelions and having it look perfect. That emptiness, that longing inside of you, that's not going to go away because you have a perfect lawn, or those shoes, or that timeshare in Disneyland. That's not where you're going to get I know what you keep doing is you keep grabbing those things and thinking, this is going to give me real life. This is going to give me peace. This is going to give me joy. This is going to give me happiness. If I can just retire when I'm 55 and have a pension. It's comforting, but that's not what gives you real life. And Jesus then refers back to this story in Exodus and says, remember when you were fed in the wilderness, when you went from slavery into freedom and got real life then, and you wondered what that bread was? I was that bread. I'm the bread that leads you through the wilderness. I'm the bread that takes you from slavery and hunger and longing into freedom. I'm the bread that takes you into walking around like a dead person, into living your real life that God wanted from you from before you were even thought of. I am that bread. I did not start out an Episcopalian. My earliest church experience was in the American Baptist Church, which makes me feel like I'm allowed to make fun of the primitive Chilhowie Baptist Church. Maybe I'm not, but I feel like I have a kinship. And I happened to show up at a Baptist church, not because I was interested in church, but because I read in the paper they were going to do a Habitat for Humanity project. And I wanted to be involved in something that made me feel like I was doing something important. And so I showed up at this church, and this church was full of gray-haired people, and boy, were they happy to see me. And they glommed onto me, and it happened to be the first Sunday. And first Sundays are the only day during the month that Baptists have communion. And Baptists don't have communion like this church does. Have any of you ever been to a Baptist church? Here's what you get. Somewhere in the back room, there's a couple of little old ladies who spend probably 2 hours cutting up cubes of Wonder Bread and sticking them on trays. They're perfect little cubes. And then there's another tray, like a 5-tiered tray of plastic cups full of grape juice. It's weird. And I was there, and I was sitting in a pew, and everybody was really kind, and they were sweet, and I wanted to be involved in doing this Habitat project with them. And so when they started passing around the cubes of bread and the little grape juice cup, I was like, okay, for now I'm in with you guys. And I ate the bread. It was weird, and I drank the little cup and stuck it in the pew. Very strange. It's many, many years since. I do not remember why I showed up again at the church. I do remember that there was never a Habitat project. I don't know what happened to that. But suddenly, I was back in the church for whatever reason. And then I was there again, and then was cleaning the church with them. And every once in a while, I'd get that little cup of grape juice and that little piece of bread. And I started connecting with it. And I can't completely tell you why. Like, here's some of the things I thought. I'm looking around, and there's something, why is this bread and wine or grape juice moving me? And I'm like, okay, maybe it's because it means that we're all part of something much bigger than our collective whole. There's something else that this means, the sign of something, that we're connected to each other. And they're not even my friends, and they're not my family, but somehow we're connected. And then maybe another Sunday it would be, there's this hunger inside of me that brought me here, and I can't tell you what it is because I'm still here, even though I didn't get the Habitat job. But I'm still showing up because I'm still hungry for something, and she must be hungry, and she must be hungry, and she must be hungry. Maybe it's that. Or maybe it's that there's, no matter how many people are here, there's always going to be enough. Maybe it's that. I don't know. And then flash forward, I can't tell you the rest of the story, but flash forward, I go to college and I have this moment where I feel called to the ministry. So this hunger is growing clearly inside of me, this bread that makes you hungrier, and this wine that makes you thirstier for something. And then everything gets derailed because I get together with Rosemary and we're in love and I don't know what to do. And I wind up in Hoboken. And I'm literally at a loss for where I'm supposed to be. And Rosemary says, You need to go talk to the Episcopal minister in town, Jeff. And here's why. Rosemary is 15 years older than me, and she'd been in Hoboken all through the 80s. This is during the height of the AIDS epidemic, when people did not know what was going on except people were dropping to the ground. And everyone was terrified of getting sick. So Rosemary was in the gay community in Hoboken at that time, and there was a guy named David who died of AIDS, and he died at St. Mary's Hospital, and there was nobody there to collect his body. Nobody was willing to take it. And David's friends were trying to figure out how, once the body was taken, a funeral home could do it, but they were trying to figure out what funeral home would be willing to take his body. And every funeral director was terrified to take the body. And they got rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. And then finally, David's friends went to talk to Jeff. And Jeff went next door to the funeral home, which had already been contacted, and he knocked on the door, and he went in, and he sat down with this guy who he had a 20-year relationship with, John Lawton. He's a wonderful man. And he said to John Lawton, I'm going to tell you something. You're going to take this man's body or you will never do business with me again. And Lawton Funeral Home took the body. And Jeff had the funeral. And there wasn't a soul in the church, which was standing room only that day, that belonged to that church. And probably most of them had been kicked out of their church at some point because of who they were. And the reason Rosemary told me to go see Jeff, I think, was because there was something about Jeff's life that was larger than the lives of the people around him. There was something feeding him and making him not afraid to embrace life, and something that made him somewhat fearless about death. And this is a corny pun, but I mean it. That story is the breadcrumbs that I followed to you. And I showed up at that church, and every week I lined up for the mystery of this sacrament. There's a saying that you are what you eat. And I'm telling you that Jesus really is the bread of heaven and the cup of life. And you don't have to understand intellectually what that means. But He will shape you. He will shape you into Himself. If you just keep on showing up with your hands open in need and being unashamed to show your hunger for that thing that nothing else will fill. This last 25 years of my life, I have gone to see people and love them, people who I never thought I would have had a relationship with. And that was Jesus. And I have been places I thought I would never go. And that was Jesus. And I have done extraordinary things that I never thought I was capable of doing. And that was Jesus. Do you feel that hunger for a larger, freer life, not afraid of death? Then welcome to this table. Amen.
Amen.